I'd like to introduce the Governor of the State of Indiana, Mitch Daniels. Lieutenant Governor Becky Skillman. President Pro Tem of the Senate, David Long. Majority Floor Leader of the Senate, Senator Connie Lawson. Majority Caucus Chair of the Senate, James Merritt. I'm sure she's on her way, Senator Vi Simpson, the Minority Leader. My Assistant Minority Floor Leader, Tim Lannon, en route. These people may be escorts, so we may reintroduce them. Minority Caucus Chair Connie Sipes. Majority House Floor Leader Russell Stilwell. Majority Caucus Chair Dale Grubb. Speaker Pro Tem Chet Dobus. Minority Leader Brian Bosma. Minority Floor Leader Bill Friend. Minority Caucus Chair Kathy Richardson. The North Balcony, Amy McDonnell, wife of Chief Justice Shepard. Maddie Shepard, daughter of the Chief Justice. Jan Dixon, wife of Justice Brent Dixon. Cheryl Sullivan, wife of Justice Frank Sullivan. Denise Rucker, wife of Justice Robert Rucker. The Honorable Greg Zeller, Attorney General. The Honorable Tim Berry, Auditor of the State. Jerry Bonnet, Chief Counsel to Secretary of State Todd Rokita. Adrian Myring, Counsel, Judicial Qualification Commission. Members of the Indiana Judicial Qualification Commission, John Feitner, Christine Keck, Julie Armstrong, Executive Director of Indianapolis Bar Association. Jeff Lynn, President-elect, Indiana State Bar Association. Christine Hickey, President-elect, Indianapolis Bar Association. Rod Morgan, Indiana State Bar Association. Jim Voiles, President, Indianapolis Bar Association. This time, with the Chief Justice and the legislative escorts and the judges of the Indiana Appellate and Tax Court, please come forward. Chief. See, they want me to do this, and I never done it. You want me to? You can't hear them. The Chief Justice is being escorted by Representatives Pierce, Pryor, Yard, and Culver, and Senators Charbonneau, Head, Lannon, and Broden. Supreme Court Justices are Justice Brent Dixon, Justice Frank Sullivan, Justice Ted Bohm, and Justice Robert Rucker. The Indiana Court of Appeals judges are Chief Judge John Baker, Judge Edward Najam, Judge Patricia Riley, Judge James Kirsch, Judge Carr Darden, Judge Margaret Robb, Judge Nancy Vadick, Judge Paul Mathias, Judge Michael Barnes, Judge Terry Crone, Judge Cale Bradford, Judge Elaine Brown. Pardon me? Judge Mark Bailey. The tax court judge, Judge Thomas Fisher. It is my honor to present to you Lieutenant Governor Becky Skillman.
Members of the Joint Assembly, pursuant to Section 3 of Article 7 of the Constitution of the State of Indiana, this joint session of the General Assembly is now convened for the purpose of hearing a message from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the State of Indiana, It's my privilege to present to you the distinguished Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Honorable Randall T. Shepard.
Thank you for coming. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all so very much. Well, like many of you, I've lived through plenty of economic downturns, but none so serious as the one we're now experiencing, and none so challenging for those who serve in government. Just as the demands on our services peak, finances restrain our capacity to respond. The pressures of this gloomy reality are felt inside the third branch just as they are in the rest of government and in the rest of the private economy. The Great Recession has driven our filings to record numbers. Calling them filings may sound technical, but it's very human. It's a tangible marker of a society under stress. More businesses short on cash flow, suing people who can't pay their bills. More families dissolving in divorce, more abused and neglected citizens, more receiverships, more foreclosures. In short, if it's bad for you and you can put a name on it, it shows up in the courtroom. Still, as I work with the men and women of the court system, people who spend their days with those citizens who are struggling the most, what strikes me is how many of them have found the ingenuity and the energy to lift up the legal system, even in trying conditions. Even as our team of trial judges moves ahead with planning for our future, in place after place, judges and lawyers and court staff have managed in the here and now to summon the energy, the focus, the tough-mindedness to ramp up the system even in the midst of crisis. For example, we are nearly overwhelmed by the explosion in mortgage foreclosures. It isn't just the raw numbers. The complexity of modern financial instruments and the task of handling foreclosed property in a down real estate market makes this all the more difficult, and it strains the judicial system. When I reported to you last year at this time, I said that we had joined forces with the Mortgage Prevention Foreclosure Network led by Lieutenant Governor Skillman, and that our first contribution to the general effort would be to train judges and lawyers in the law and the economics and the mechanics of modern foreclosures so that they could better assist people who were in need. I promised that afternoon that we would train the largest number of judges and lawyers and mediators anywhere in the country. Now, I didn't put a number in my speech, but I knew what it was. We had looked across the country, and the largest number we could find anywhere was 700, and that was in Maryland. Eventually, with leadership from people like Judge Melissa May, with help from partners like the State Bar and its educational arm, and local judges, and pro bono committees, and the law schools of our state, we staged training sessions in every corner of Indiana so that by mid-October, when Attorney General Zeller and Senator Tallien and I went down to Evansville for one of the last of these sessions, we hadn't trained 700 people, we hadn't trained 800, we hadn't trained 900, we'd trained 1,112, and that is the largest number anywhere in the country. Why does that matter? I had a lesson in answering that question on the very same day that we went to the meeting in Evansville. When I came back to do what many of my colleagues do on a regular basis, which is to go out and say thank you to lawyers who volunteer their time to work for free for people who need legal help and don't have the money. And by the way, the number of lawyers who've done that in our state this year is at an all-time high. It says something very nice about Indiana lawyers. But on that day, I went out to Hendricks County to say thank you to the lawyers who'd done that. And as it happens, I sat next to a lawyer, a young lawyer named Tracy Twait. She practices in Avon, Indiana. And she told me that she'd agreed to work for 2 families for free who were involved in housing foreclosure. And I said, how does that? So how's it going? She said, well, we've held meetings in both of these cases. We haven't managed to settle either one, but we're still talking. And so far, nobody's been thrown out of their house. I said, well, we'll call that a little bit of progress. And I saw her a couple of weeks later. She came up to me with a big smile and she said, "We've managed to settle one of those cases. We rewrote the loan. That family's going to stay in this house and they're going to work on the other one." I said, "That's progress for sure." And that's exactly why it matters. Our next objective will be to energize the settlement sessions that your legislation of 2009 require before a foreclosure can be carried out. We'll be placing facilitators in various counties in our state to help make those settlement sessions work, to bring together people who are lenders, the lawyers who represent the citizens, and the citizens themselves, using as a tool the temporary fee on mortgage foreclosures in that legislation, the most perfect user fee I think I have ever seen, in a bill that, as you know, was sponsored by Senator Tallien and by Representatives Barden and Cook and Rican. Now, the recession puts other kinds of pressure on families, and last year we had a surge in divorces. We're also encountering more children who are neglected or abused or otherwise at risk. Fortunately, even before the recession, you decided that every child who was abused or neglected ought to have his or her own advocate in court. And we began to try to make that happen. And this is a wonderful story, a place where Indiana does tremendous work. I'll give you just one statistic to tell you how it is going. The number of new people volunteering, some states pay lawyers to do this. We use volunteers who are trained to do it. The number of citizens coming forth and volunteering to be court-appointed special advocates last year was up 26% over 2008. 2008 was up 51% over 2007. It's a wonderful story about people who volunteer to help their fellow citizens in our state. Now, speaking of the vulnerable, the strains of recession generate more domestic violence, too. Last time this year, the Supreme Court's Judicial Technology and Automation Committee, JTAC, was energetically installing the Electronic Protective Order Registry so that law enforcement officers would know in an instant when an order for protection was in place. On this afternoon last year, we'd installed that registry in 72 counties. You decided that every county should implement that system. And there were many legislators with their hands on that measure. Representatives Dembowski and Lawson and Cook and Pond, Senator Charbonneau and Becker and Arrington and Lannon and Taylor and Richard Young, Representative Crouch, and I want to report to them and to you that as we stand here today, women and children and a few men too enjoy that protection in all 92 counties. The other work, the work that we do with law enforcement agencies, has also improved through the use of technology. The electronic citation system developed by JTAC, called EQUIS, or ECWS, is now in the hands of more than 5,000 law enforcement officers, including all of the state police and 142 local agencies at the county and municipal level. And so far, they've used these electronic handhelds to issue some 1.7 million citations. Among other things, this means that officers and motorists are safer because they spend less time on the side of a busy highway where they can really be at risk. But it also means that officers spend more time on patrol and less time handwriting tickets. And this is undoubtedly one of the reasons, just one of many reasons, measures taken by the state police and by local agencies and by the people who design and build our highways, why Indiana recorded last year the lowest number of traffic fatalities since 1925. This is worth celebrating, and we're glad that we were a little bit a part of making that happen. The 21st century case management system that links all this together, a private enterprise product called Odyssey, is likewise being deployed throughout the court system. Just yesterday, we began using it in one of the courts in Madison County, and now we've installed it in some 50 courts in 18 counties, large and small alike. 2 weeks ago, the system went live in Huntington and Blackford, and a week before that in Harrison County, where Frank O'Bannon's newspaper, looking at the result, wrote an editorial saying there is much to like about this development. In September, the clerk and courts in Hamilton County, now our third largest county, began using it. And we expect that Allen County will be online in the third quarter of this year. We do this with care and deliberation. We are frequently in the course of moving literally hundreds of thousands of case information that belong to individual citizens. That's tough work. You have to do it with care. And so at any given moment, there are a number of counties wanting to go online more than our installation troops can manage to make happen at any given time. Now, the disposition of serious violations of law, serious violations of the criminal law, is a crucial part of what a court system does. And the sentences judges impose make all the difference in how much recidivism there is and how we use the most expensive tool in our arsenal, prison beds, keeping it for offenders who represent the greatest threat to society. If you don't get this right, and you can't always get it right, but if you don't get it as right as you possibly can, the result is bad in both directions. You either end up putting lower risk offenders in prison beds where they might not need to be, or higher risk offenders out on the street where they don't belong. And so it's important that we do it as carefully as we can. And among the weaknesses in Indiana's criminal justice system has been that we mostly use very dated instruments for trying to assess the probable risk that an individual offender presents. But advances in sociology and criminology make it possible to assess the risk involved with individual defendants with more precision than we used to be able to do. And after several years' work by probation officers and criminal court judges and the Indiana Judicial Center and the Department of Correction, last Friday, the board of the Indiana Judicial Conference adopted a new statewide tool for the assessing of juvenile offenders, one that will provide information about offenders as they move in through the system, all the way through law enforcement, through bail decisions, through probation decisions, and in the Department of Corrections, seamlessly from one part of the system to the other. We did most of this without general fund money, a lot of it with help from the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute, and in fact, because we chose to use public domain software, the counties and the Department of Correction will save on money that they presently spend on proprietary products that are less effective than the one that will now be used. In St. Joseph County, for example, last year they spent $10,000 or $12,000 paying for assessment tools one at a time. In Monroe County, they spent about $6,500, and you can extrapolate that number. Some of that is Department of Corrections money that comes straight out of the general fund. And when we're done with this, close to the end of the year, all of that spending will go away, and we'll have a better set of decisions for a lower price than ever before. Now, this is one of the many initiatives we've pursued, notwithstanding the recession. Another one is to assure that we have fair and representative juries. And JTAC and the Judicial Center have created a jury list that combines information from the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, the Department of Revenue, and the Postal Service. It is the most accurate list of who lives in a county every year, ever. And the national leaders in jury improvement came to Indiana last month to recognize this achievement. And the representative of the National Center for State Courts who came, Governor Daniels, fortunately was able to be with us, said very straightforward and very simply, on this score, Indiana sets the national standard. And to make sure that juries can do a good job once they're in the box, we're about to complete a project called Plain English Jury Instructions. We instruct jurors thousands of times a year on the law that applies to the cases which they are hearing. All too often, we do that in jargon that's nearly impenetrable. By this spring, we will issue a whole new set of jury instructions, legally correct to be sure, but written with the help of English teachers so that jurors have a better shot at getting it right. And as for understanding the law, you'll remember that we plan to use the 200th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth as the occasion for lawyers and judges to go to Indiana's classrooms, yes, to talk about Abraham Lincoln, but to talk about Abraham Lincoln the lawyer, and about the rule of law, and about the American system of government. And that project, which we did jointly with the Indiana State Bar Association, exceeded well beyond our projections. So it's already won 3 awards, state awards, national awards, and to make a long story short, at the end of the day, more than 500 lawyers and judges gave talks about civics and about citizenship to 33,000 Indiana students. That was time worth spending. Another program designed to boost promising students reached a real milestone last year. The Indiana Conference on Legal Education Opportunity, which works to help minority and other disadvantaged college students become lawyers, has enjoyed splendid support in the General Assembly. Chairman Crawford has been a part of it from the very beginning. Representative Harris has been there holding our hand. One of the original sponsors, Cleo Duncan, is sitting here in the third row. Phyllis Pond has been very helpful on this, and something very important happened last year. In October of last year, Governor Daniels appointed a member of the inaugural class of Indiana Clio, Rudolph Pyle III, to be a judge of the Circuit Court in Madison County. He is the first African-American judge in that county, the first Clio graduate to become a judge in a court of record, but he's our second judge. Our actual first judge is a former judge of the City Court of East Chicago, Eduardo Fontanez. You helped make that happen. Governor Daniels helped make it happen. And the two of them are here today. Won't you stand up so we can tell you how proud we are to be associated with what you've managed to get done. Eduardo Fontanez, by the way, isn't a judge anymore, and he's available for anybody who needs legal representation in around Lake County. Specializes in criminal law and financial workouts, I believe. I want you to know that the judiciary will do its part to aid in the budget crisis. For example, in a few days, we're going to stop doing something that we've been doing since at least May of 1817. For 193 years, when one of the courts on appeal reaches a decision in a case, we've been mailing the decision to the lawyers in the case. And starting in a few weeks, we're not going to send them by mail anymore. We're going to send them only by email, and that alone is going to save $39,000 in postage this year and $39,000 in postage next year, and probably more in postage the year after that. It'll save permanent ramping down of what it costs us to run the clerk's office. Last week, we decided to postpone for this year regional meetings we've conducted with trial court judges every spring for at least 2 generations. That's going to save us about $16,000. We've held open some senior staff positions in state court administration and saved so far $227,000. I know these numbers are not big numbers, but neither is the judiciary. Our whole budget is only 1.5% or maybe 2% of all the spending that's done by the state and by the local government. Some of these are changes that would stand on their own. They're things that we would want to do even in good times. And some of them are things we really don't want to have to do. But there are a lot of people in government that are doing things that they'd rather not do right now, and I want you to know that we'll do our part to help manage our way through the fiscal distress that everybody is experiencing. I suggest 3 topics on which the branches might collaborate, both by legislation and through administrative arrangements. First, we should do everything we possibly can think of to collect all the revenue that the law says is owed as a result of court operations. You'll remember that when the General Assembly decided to assume responsibility at the state level for local welfare costs and for delinquency costs, that the Department of Child Services and the Judiciary implemented that legislation in a way that made Indiana able to recoup federal reimbursement that we had always left on the table. Now, we leave other money on the table in other sorts of court cases, and that's money that ought to go to help run the state government and the local governments. Making sure that we capture all this revenue is partly a matter of how we are organized. It is partly a matter of judicial and other administration. It is partly a matter of legislative authorization, and I have some specific ideas, but I'd like to suggest that this is something that we bear down on while you are here over the next weeks and months, and we'd like to be a part of making it happen. Second, the recession has produced record filings, both in 2008 and in 2009, right at, it's hard to believe, right at the 2 million mark. 2 million new cases in the courts in each of those years. These filings represent parents who are trying to collect child support, injured people who are trying to get recompense for their hospital bills, and prosecutors who are pursuing criminal defendants. And record caseloads means that our ability to give people a hearing is squeezed. And there are more postponements, sometimes on things that are time sensitive. In normal times, we'd ask for additional judges to meet this need, but that's not possible now, and it isn't going to be possible for quite a while. And one of our only tools to meet that increased need is the cadre of senior judges who come back and work for us roughly at a rate twice the minimum wage. It would be helpful to us if you could authorize us to use retired magistrates, state-paid magistrates, as well as retired judges to meet these growing caseloads. In the short run, it won't cost anything at all. In the long run, it'll be incredibly cheap. Third, among the most effective strategies we have available are drug courts and reentry courts, and the General Assembly has created a statutory framework that help Indiana courts make both of those happen. Now, one of the results of the fact that we have been for 8 years a nation at war is that we find people in court with special disabilities and special needs that flow from their military service. I ask you to give us the framework under which we can establish veterans courts and other problem-solving courts as the need arises. The Commission on Courts has endorsed this idea. It's contained in House Bill 1271, sponsored by Representatives Lawson and Cook. This bill has no fiscal note on it. We will either do it or not do it with whatever resources we can scrape together at the local level, and collectively, all three of these ideas that I've proposed are undoubtedly fiscally positive to the general fund and the general funds of the counties. Finally, I'd like to describe an extraordinary experience that I had last month at Emmerich Manual High School. It's not a story about the courts, but it's a story about Indiana's spirit. Now, some of you would know that Matthew Tully of the Indianapolis Star, who can mostly be seen drawing a bullseye on the back of somebody in this hall, but over the last 5 months, Matt Tully's been writing stories about an inner-city high school that's so challenged it can no longer field a football team. It's a school that started off with 400. You don't have to know a lot about it in order to know how tough it is. It's a school that started off with, the class of 2010 had 490 members. And the principal hopes that 155 of them will get across the finish line this spring. Now, these stories have generated an enormous response among readers. And after he'd been inundated with emails from readers saying, what can I do to help, Tully, at the beginning of December, wrote and said, well, if you want a chance to show you care about these kids, the choir and the band are having a Christmas pageant next Tuesday night at 6:30. Why don't you show up and let them know that you care? And the response was absolutely phenomenal, showing, among other things, that newspapers still matter, but showing that people care about what happens in these places. As my family and I turned the corner onto South Madison Avenue, you could see, it was dark already, you could see the headlights all the way up 2 or 3 blocks to the crest of the hill where the next stoplight was. You couldn't really tell how many people were on the other side, all of them hoping to get into the high school's parking lot long ago, filled to capacity, so they were fanning out into the neighborhoods parking. And nobody's really sure how many people got in. The auditorium only holds 1,200. The best estimates are that maybe 3,000 people showed up. Some people say 4,000. Now, the 2 teachers who played key roles in making that miracle happen were center stage, though they obviously had a lot of support from other people in the school. The band director is a man named Mike Weber. And we need all the male African-American role models in Indiana's high schools we can get. his ally, the choir director, who was center stage, is a man named Spencer Lloyd. He's 25 years old. This is his third year as a teacher. He grew up in a very interesting small town called Farmland, Indiana. It's a very interesting place, but boy, it's a small place. Even when you know it's in Randolph County, you have to look on the highway map carefully in order to know exactly where Farmland is. And he's committed his life to helping students in the inner city. Yes, these two teachers help kids learn music, to be sure, but they were doing so much more than that. They were giving them the self-confidence to stand up in front of other people and perform and sing and talk. And they were encouraging them to stay in school and helping them to understand why their future would be so much different if they didn't melt away the way hundreds of their classmates have already done. And the fact that so many citizens decided to come and say, yes, we want what you're doing to continue. We want it to improve. Imagine this as one of the challenges of the night. They had put out boxes. If you want to help the school in some way and you want to give us money for something we don't have the money to do anymore, put money in the box. Well, they had chosen shoe boxes, totally inadequate to the task. They're all the time dumping the shoe boxes into bigger boxes because so many citizens were putting money in to say, this is what I want to do to help this place of public education. And the fact that thousands of people came to cheer them on, I tell you, in a word, was simply thrilling to behold. It said a lot about what people in Indiana really care about. And I come today to tell you that there are plenty of men and women in our court system who, like those persistent and unshakable music teachers, even in the darkest hour, are unwilling to roll over and play dead. They've decided instead to stand their ground, to spend and be spent in the cause of building and rebuilding a place worthy of the fine name Indiana. And that's the state of your judiciary. I'll take my seat. All right.